Hello. If you don't know me already or aren't familiar with me, my name is Z, also known as CreativeSpinz over on Instagram. I run a small business bringing both pre-made and commissioned designs to life in the form of LPS Customs. I first decided to start up my small business early August of 2022 after seeing bigger customizers such as Hello Studios and LPS Cobalt create beautiful and inspiring pieces. It all started out as making gifts for loved ones until I discovered I had quite the interest in customizing. After taking a roughly year-long break, I came back early July of 2023 after rediscovering the LPS custom community and finding out the community was bigger than anticipated. After dipping my toes in the water, I realized I have a huge passion for painting and customizing LPS. Rediscovering the LPS community has been a huge blessing as I've made lots of friends and had help from other customizers. It all started when I took customizing seriously for the first time in 2019. I had started on customizing on and off after losing interest. I've discovered that people, especially newer customizers, can be envious that other customizers with much more experience produce well thought out, detailed customs. I've been there, but I keep reminding myself as I remind my newer customizing friends that we all start somewhere. As you can see here, one of my first customs that I ever did seriously was back in 2019. This was my previous mascot, Daisei. 2022, I had rediscovered the LPS community as a whole, as well as the LPS customizing community. I did another dachshund as one of my first customs back in the community, and late August I finished one of my biggest customs ever that took me a few months. That was a gift for a good friend of mine. I often find myself struggling to come up with designs for pre-made customs, but looking on Pinterest for color palettes and mood boards, thinking of patterns and what colors would work best with each other, etc., are what get me moving. Sometimes when that doesn't work, I quote-unquote phone a friend and ask how they would help, or ask how they would go about the design and miscellaneous things like sculpting. Having a fresh pair of eyes often helps me look and think clear about how I want to go about it. At the end of the day, I remember that it's my design and my choice of what I would like to do next. A lot of the time for me, in order to know what I like to do and know what looks best where, I need to choose what base would suit the design best. Sometimes I know exactly what I want, but don't know what base to use. In those cases, I often go to DeviantArt and look for templates of LPS molds. I take the bases into an art program and draw the designs I'm thinking under their line art just to get a feel of how it would look. Some bases might fit better for some designs than others, though at the end of the day, it's the designer or customizer's choice. For the actual bases themselves, you can find blank white bases on Amazon, though you'll typically find sets of the main 5 molds. For other molds that I think of customizing, I go to AliExpress as they have a slightly larger selection of fake LPS of a variety of molds. Another option for those who have access to it, you can also 3D print your own LPS bases, though they'll most likely have a ball joint to connect the neck and head and won't bobble completely. For sculpting, you'd have a few choices of materials. You can go for actual clay, such as air dry or baked clay, though it's not always recommended for beginners. You can also go for epoxy-based sculpting materials, which essentially have 2 parts that you mix with a 50-50 ratio that harden once combined. Epoxy Sculpt by Aves is one of those 2-part sculpting materials. Something that frustrated me when I first started using this was how much the clay stuck to my hands. All you have to do is dampen your fingers and it will start sticking more to itself. The green stuff, also known as Kneadatite, is a 2-part compound just as Epoxy Sculpt is. It often has the same phenomenon where it'll stick to you and not so much the LPS. All you'll have to do is the same thing you would do with Epoxy Sculpt. Cold porcelain clay is made up of cornstarch and glue and is not actual porcelain, therefore drying naturally in the air as glue would. The clay will dry as you go. All you'll have to do is smear very small amounts of water into the clay and it will revive itself. Sometimes the clay won't stick to the plastic, so all you'll have to do is wet the plastic lightly and the clay will stick onto the desired area. I have never personally used oven-baked clay, although it seems pretty straightforward. I'd go to YouTube and look up how to use oven-baked clay on LPS, or go to Hello Studio's channel as she has some good explanation and tips about how to use it safely. I often use other tools, especially during the sculpting stage, such as metal and rubber sculpting tools. I'd recommend getting rubber tools of a smaller size to make sure you have enough room to work on the custom. My favorite brands of paint is DecoArt's Americana acrylic paint line, as they have a decently wide range of colors and shades. Other brands I'd recommend are Liquitex and Apple Barrel. Liquitex, like DecoArt, often have very pigmented acrylic paints. Typically, paints that come in tubes are going to be more pigmented than bottles. If you're looking for basic colors, I'd highly recommend DecoArt Americana, and I'd very highly suggest grabbing a larger bottle of both black and white. Apple Barrel also carries a decently wide selection of colors and shades, and are a cheaper alternative than both DecoArt Americana and Liquitex Basics. For customizing in general, but especially for detailed customs, I'd highly suggest getting detail brushes. Standard sizing typically goes something like this, listed from largest to smallest, 3, 3-0, 10-0, 18-0, and sometimes 20-0. When looking for brushes in person, look at the tags on the brushes for the words liner or spotter. These suggest that the tips of the brushes are going to have a bit more of a sharper point than a round labeled brush. You could find individual detail brushes in craft stores, or you could search on Amazon for detail brush sets. I recommend looking at professional grade detail brushes and read the reviews. The following brands I'd suggest looking at are AIEX, AIT, and other professional grade brands. Investing in an airbrush is completely optional, as they could be pricey if you're looking for something nicer. If you're customizing for you and friends or family, an airbrush may not be necessary. However, if you're looking to sell customs and/or take on custom commissions, an airbrush may be a huge help in efficiency as well as the overall finish of the custom. You can find airbrushes on Amazon anywhere from $25 to $100 US. The lower end may be made up of handheld airbrush machines with the brush and compressor all in one piece. It all depends on preference, but for me I prefer an actual airbrush machine with the tube and compressor and all. Those will typically be your best bet, but also maybe on the higher end, anywhere from $70 upwards US. I recommend looking on YouTube, watching in-depth tutorials on use, tips, trial and error, and most importantly, cleaning and care of the airbrush. Airbrushes can be complicated to clean, and you may face challenges with use if not cleaned properly. An airbrush cleaning solution may come in handy between usage, although I found Windex works good for an easier, more accessible alternative. For finishing and sealing LPS customs, you have a variety of options. You can use spray sealants or varnishes meant for paintings. The most popular few options I've seen are the matte and glossy Mod Podge, which is not waterproof or permanent. I've never tried it for the overall sealant of the custom, though some of your varnish options may be permanent acrylic varnish in matte, satin, and gloss. You also have a few spray varnish or sealant options, such as Krylon Satin Finish, my new favorite, and Mr. Super Clear. I personally use Krylon Satin Permanent Spray Varnish as an overall sealant and a Liquitex High Gloss Permanent Varnish for the eyes. For tips, I'm aware everyone says this, but please water down your paints. The base coat, color, the details, and the sealant if you're using something like Mod Podge. You'll most likely have to find what works best with the paints you use, but typically you'd want to aim for something liquidy enough to where the coats go on smooth, but not so much to where it's really dripping and creates air bubbles. When using an airbrush, something I found is you could lay on a semi-heavy coat of paint and the overall finish would be even smoother than if you were to lightly spray the custom. Although, you'd have to find a good balance between what is too thin and what is too thick, as well as how thick or thin the paint itself needs to be. I'd recommend using an old LPS or a blank based as a test custom, experimenting with different painting styles, different thicknesses of paint, different ways of application, and etc. And here are a few more customs from me. I apologize that this was short, but I am all open for questions. Yes, I always use an airbrush, pretty much. Um, some of the most fun customs I've ever done certainly have to be some commissions or pre-mades that I've done, such as this one here, which is a combination of a few different animals and is an interesting character of a friend of mine that is going to appear in their YouTube series. I also love doing extra sculpting, such as like sharks with big tails, and I recently tried sculpting new ears and fluff, wings, tails, etc. Those tend to be the most fun for me. Um, for Liquitex acrylic paints, I I've used it a couple times. I noticed that typically they're pretty um opaque, but the more you water it down, the less opaque it's going to be. So like I said previously, you're really going to have to find a good balance. And I can most definitely give you a couple options for the airbrushes. And a custom that was pretty difficult for me definitely had to be this one right here. I'm not sure if it'll give me an option to zoom in, but you could see I had to change out the colors in my airbrush several times. I used blue, purple, yellow, and pink, and I just swapped between all of those as it was a commission giveaway. The sculpting wasn't so much the hard part, but the gradient was definitely something that gave me a challenge. Um, Going on to the other question of what my eye painting process is, I typically do the black parts, the eyelashes or eyeliner first. And if I mess up, I typically paint the base coat color over the parts that I messed up. But with this custom here, because of the complicated gradients, I had to be super, super careful because I could not paint over my mistakes. But typically I do the black outlining of everything first, then build up the white parts. The style of the coloring in the eyes, it varies a lot. If I want it in a certain direction, I will try and either sketch it out with pencil or something like that, or I just wing it pretty much. But I think painting the eyes of customs has to be my favorite part.